So now we're going to talk about ideology and social policy. Now, when I talk about social policy, generally speaking, what I mean are policies that affect relationships between citizens. And in this example, I'm going to use same-sex marriage. Now, as you're preparing for the exam, I want you to be thinking about the definition of ideology and the importance of thinking in terms of the proper role of government, the proper order of society, right, and the role of tradition as seen by liberals and conservatives. So in this case, let's talk about same-sex marriage. Now, I always preface this conversation by something that dean at College of the Canyons told me. The dean is no longer at College of the Canyons, but when she said this to me, it was very eye-opening, and I hope you'll appreciate it as much as I did. I forgot what the conversation was about, but I had used the term same-sex marriage. This dean was gay. I'm assuming she still is gay. And as I was talking, she kind of frowned at me a little bit. And we were very close, and so I was surprised at the frown. And I asked her, did I say something that offended you? And she leaned back in her chair, as she liked to do, and she looked at me and she said, Phil, she said, I don't same-sex park my car, and I don't same-sex walk my dog. I park my car and I walk my dog. And I don't same-sex marry. I get married. And so I thought that was really profound. Now maybe you're thinking like, so who cares? But to me, that meant it got me to thinking about things. So I'm obviously still using the term same-sex marriage because I have to in order to explain what I'm trying to get across. But it did highlight to me like a feeling that some people may have about certain terminology and how important it is to understand and listen to others when they express views about terminology and language, because everything that I'm talking about is all about understanding people. So with that in mind as a backdrop, and I hope that wasn't a waste of your time, are liberals going to be more likely to favor or oppose same-sex marriage? Well, hopefully you said liberals are going to be more likely to favor same-sex marriage, and that is true. You can see that in public opinion polls. Now, I'm going to ask about conservatives, but I want to be clear that the question I'm asking about doesn't really apply to younger conservatives. Most of the people in this class probably fall within the age of between 18 and maybe 23. And so what I'm going to say, if you're a conservative, probably doesn't apply to you, because there are a lot of younger people who have a different view on same-sex marriage than older conservatives. So I'm actually talking about older conservatives. Are older conservatives more likely to favor or oppose same-sex marriage? And the reality is that older conservatives are more likely to oppose same-sex marriage. Now, again, why is that the case? We can explain the difference, or what I call the elaboration in on the exams, by talking about the proper role of government, the proper order of society, and the role of tradition. So let's start with liberals. Remember, I said for liberals, as it relates to tradition, any tradition that makes it more difficult to achieve this egalitarian ideal should be dispensed with, right? For liberals, unless there's some reason that same-sex couple, that gay couples shouldn't get married, some compelling reason, these groups shouldn't be treated differently. And I can tell you that study after study after study has examined the outcomes of children from same-sex couples versus opposite-sex couples, whatever you want, traditional couples, and there's no difference. As a matter of fact, the last study I saw showed a slightly higher functioning among children from same-sex couples, but it wasn't a statistically significant difference. But more to the point, for liberals, any tradition that's going to get in the way of an egalitarian society should be dispensed with. And so for them, the role of it in tradition isn't going to be important. For them, the proper order of society is egalitarian. And so if a straight person can get married to a straight person, then a gay person should be able to get married to a gay person. That's the egalitarian ideal. In terms of the proper role of government, the role of government is to ensure that we have this egalitarian ideal. And so that means that the government should do something because there were a lot of bans on same-sex marriage, that the government should do what it can to get rid of those laws and make it possible for anybody, any adult, to get married to any adult as long as it's consensual. We can explain this all just in terms of how liberals view the proper role of government, the proper order of society, and the role of tradition. Now, for older conservatives, keep in mind that they believe that the government should be limited. And for them, tradition provides stability. So they would look at this and say, historically, marriage has been restricted to a man and a woman. This is like sort of the foundation, the building block of society, the nuclear family. And that tinkering with the building blocks of the nuclear family is problematic. So just because of their role, their view of the role of tradition, they're going to be reticent about changing something as significant as the building blocks for society. Also, for conservatives, the goal is not to have an egalitarian ideal. The goal is to have a stable society, right? That's at least part of it. And so in terms of the proper order of society, they're not as committed to this idea of there being everything being equal, all groups being treated the same, that there are going to be some instances where it may be important to treat groups differently, but that more importantly, the role of the government should be limited. And so if there is going to be a change in the meaning and the definition of marriage and who is legally allowed to be married, that change should take place like holistically, that it should happen over time, that as society's views change and people start to think about things differently, that eventually laws will change. And so for a conservative, rather than the federal government stepping in and issuing a ruling that invalidates all laws prohibiting same-sex marriage, the goal would be to let each society, each state, sort of come to their own conclusions, and little by little, the views of people would change and the rules surrounding same-sex marriage would change. And that if we're going to transition to a society where in which same-sex marriage is permitted, to not have the government put a heavy hand on it, let that just develop over time. So because they believe that there's a limited role for the government, that they're not as wedded to this idea of an egalitarian ideal, but they're very concerned about the maintaining tradition, not just for tradition's sake, but in order to retain stability in society, because that's what tradition does. They're going to have a different view on same-sex marriage. So we can understand the differences between, in this case, older conservatives and liberals, not by demonizing one another, but rather understanding that they have a different take on the proper role of government, the proper order of society, and the role of tradition. And so if you get this question on your exam, you're going to want to give me the elaboration. If I ask you how do liberals and conservatives view same-sex marriage, or if I ask about economic policy, just remember that I'm looking for you to answer the question in terms of these three factors that figure into ideology: the proper role of government, the proper order of society, and the role of tradition. Okay?